The HOA president parked a white maintenance pickup across the only exit, while my moving van sat loaded and the buyers waited to close. Its rear tires rested inches from my front bumper, and a laminated red notice flapped beneath my windshield wiper. Access suspended. Payment required. Linda Voss stood beside the gate keypad with her arms folded. Nobody leaves until the transfer fees clear. I had paid every amount on the resale certificate 3 days earlier. The signed document in my closing folder showed a zero balance. Linda's new ledger added $6,800 for road restoration and an emergency compliance review, neither of which had appeared in any notice, invoice, or closing statement. For a few seconds, I wanted to pull the van onto the grass and squeeze around her truck. Then I pictured Maya and Evan Brooks sitting at the title office with their financing clock running, and I put the keys back in my pocket. Winning an argument at the gate would mean nothing if I cost them the house. The movers were charging standby time by the quarter hour. One of them, a young man named Luis, opened the rear door to check whether the load had shifted. Behind a row of taped cartons sat a smaller box wrapped in one of my bath towels. Inside was the yellow kitchen clock my wife, Ellen, had wound every Sunday morning for nearly 30 years. I had packed it myself because I could not bear the thought of anyone else dropping it. I photographed Linda's truck, both license plates, the notice, the keypad, and the dashboard clock showing 9:17. Then I saved the gate camera alert from my phone. It showed the maintenance pickup entering 11 minutes before the moving crew arrived. Marcus Hale, the buyer's attorney, pulled up in a gray sedan while I was emailing the photographs. He read my resale certificate, then asked Linda for the recorded lien, the board resolution authorizing the charge, and any written instruction allowing the HOA to collect it through closing. Linda handed him a one-page ledger. Marcus studied it without raising his voice. The page contained an account code, 2 amounts, and my address, but no resolution number, second signature, invoice, or covenant reference. He called the escrow officer and followed with a written objection, requesting that every disputed HOA dollar be held rather than released until the association supplied supporting records. My phone vibrated with a message from my daughter Rachel. "Room's ready. What time should I expect you?" I typed, "Before dinner, I hope," and did not mention the truck. She had spent 2 weekends turning her downstairs office into a bedroom for me. I did not want this blockade to sound like an excuse for a widower who had changed his mind about leaving home. Marcus returned the ledger to Linda. Her expression changed when he asked why the same unexplained account code appeared beside 3 other addresses in the resale package archive. Marcus simply asked Linda to preserve every version of the ledger. The moving van was still trapped, the closing clock was still running, and the HOA had just stopped looking like a creditor collecting one debt. It looked like someone had built a system around owners who were too rushed to question it. I had bought the house in Cedar Ridge 30 years earlier, when the subdivision was still a patchwork of finished homes and muddy lots. Ellen and I chose it because the kitchen windows faced a young maple tree, and because the street connected directly to the county road. There was no gate then, only 2 stone pillars with the development name painted across them. The electronic gate arrived 12 years later after several car break-ins. Most of us supported it. The recorded amendment described the gate as a security improvement, not a device the board could use to detain residents or collect money. I remembered Ellen raising that exact concern at the meeting. She had leaned toward me and whispered that a lock was only as decent as the person holding the key. After she died, the house became harder to manage and strangely harder to leave. I could replace a breaker panel without looking at a diagram, but I sometimes stood in the grocery aisle unable to remember which coffee she used to buy. Rachel lived 90 minutes away and had started driving over every Saturday to help with meals, yard work, and the paperwork I kept postponing. Selling the house was supposed to give both of us our weekends back. The proceeds would cover a small, single-story place near her family, with enough left that I would not have to depend on her for every repair or medical bill. At 9:46, Linda emailed Marcus, the escrow officer, and me. She called the $6,800 demand a charge under Cedar Ridge's departure impact policy, adopted to protect community roads from heavy moving vehicles. The message offered no date, resolution number, inspection report, or itemized damage. It ended by stating that access would remain restricted until payment was confirmed. I returned to the empty house while Marcus stayed near the gate. My filing cabinet was gone, but I had kept one plastic folder in the kitchen for the closing. Inside were the declaration, every recorded amendment, annual notices, and the resale certificate. Tucked behind the original settlement statement was a scrap of paper bearing Ellen's handwriting. Refrigerator opening, 36 inches. Allow room for hinge. For a moment, the legal pages blurred. That note had survived 3 refrigerators, 1 kitchen remodel, and all the years after we stopped needing the measurement. I slid it into my wallet before reviewing the documents again. Nothing mentioned a departure impact policy. The latest amendment concerned roof materials, and the most recent budget identified road maintenance as a reserve expense. I forwarded the files to Marcus and called Helen Park, who had lived across from us since the first houses went up. Helen lowered her voice even though she was standing alone on her porch. She remembered a moving truck being delayed the previous spring. The seller, Raymond Cole, had paid an unexpected charge and left that afternoon. Helen had watched from her window but never asked what happened. Linda was already warning people about fines, she said. I told myself it wasn't my business. Her embarrassment mattered more to me than the excuse. Fear inside a neighborhood rarely looked dramatic. Sometimes it looked like closing the blinds and convincing yourself that silence was courtesy. Helen still had Raymond's number. When I called, he initially refused to discuss the sale. Then I described the white pickup and red notice. He went quiet before telling me he had paid $4,200 after being warned that his buyer might walk away. His closing certificate had also shown a zero balance. He promised to search for the receipt. Meanwhile, Luis handed me an updated moving company estimate. The crew's waiting charges had reached $640, with another increase due at noon. I apologized, but he shook his head and said his men would remain as long as dispatch allowed. Rachel called before I could hide behind another text. I told her the closing had been delayed, but not why. She paused, then asked whether I still wanted the room she had prepared. I want to be there, I said, and this time I heard how much she needed the answer. Marcus soon forwarded a screenshot of the HOA's meeting calendar. The date printed on Linda's ledger fell between 2 regular meetings, and the calendar showed no special session. If the policy had been adopted properly, the board had apparently approved it without ever meeting. That gap turned Linda's demand into a deeper question. Had the policy ever legally existed at all? Marcus was careful about where his responsibility ended. He represented Maya and Evan, not me, and his written objection protected their purchase funds without resolving my dispute with Cedar Ridge. Before noon, he referred me to Sarah Kim, a property attorney whose office was 10 minutes from the title company. Sarah listened without interrupting while I described the truck, Linda's notice, and Raymond's payment. Then she arranged my papers across her conference table in date order. She did not call the $6,800 charge fraudulent. She called it unsupported, which sounded less satisfying but gave us something we could prove. Her first letter demanded that Cedar Ridge clear the exit, preserve all gate recordings and accounting files, and produce the documents authorizing the departure impact policy. She requested the relevant meeting notice, minutes, vote, resolution, invoices, inspection reports, and communications with the management company. She also warned that blocking the van could interfere with the pending sale and increase measurable damages by the hour. The board responded at 2:18 with 18 pages. Most were duplicates. One set of minutes mentioned road use concerns, but recorded no motion, vote, fee amount, or policy. A cover sheet claimed the policy had been approved on May 14th. The HOA's public calendar showed no meeting that day, and the minutes from its May 7th and June 4 meetings said nothing about departing owners. More important, the authorization page contained only Linda's signature. Cedar Ridge's financial procedures required the treasurer to sign any new assessment schedule before management could add it to an owner's account. The line marked Paul Renner, treasurer, was empty. Paul called me from a number I did not recognize. He asked whether I was recording, and when I said no, he took several breaths before speaking. He told me he had never signed the policy and had objected when Linda first suggested charging sellers for road wear without individual inspections. I should have stopped it, he said. I thought refusing to sign was enough. His voice was unsteady, but not evasive. I understood the temptation to let someone else turn a private objection into a public stand. I had spent months telling Rachel I was managing fine because admitting otherwise felt like handing away part of myself. Fear and pride could both disguise themselves as patience. Paul would not yet give Sarah a statement, but he confirmed where the road expense appeared in the annual budget. The association had resurfaced the entrance lane 6 months earlier using $38,400 from its reserve account. A contractor invoice included in the board's production marked the work paid in full. Nothing connected that project to my move, and no inspection documented fresh damage from my van. At 4 o'clock, Marcus sent me a photograph from Maya. Her 7-year-old son, Noah, stood in front of a cardboard sign decorated with crooked blue letters, "Welcome Home." He had drawn the maple tree beside the house and 4 stick figures beneath it. I sat on Sarah's office steps longer than I intended, studying the extra figure he had included for me. The closing could not finish that afternoon, but Maya and Evan requested a short extension instead of walking away. Their lender agreed to keep the financing in place through the next business day. Marcus made clear that every additional condition would be documented, not turned into a threat. Back at Cedar Ridge, the maintenance truck had shifted a few feet, but still prevented the moving van from making the turn through the gate. Luis and his crew were reassigned at 5, leaving the loaded van locked in my driveway. The company charged $1,280 for waiting time and scheduled another crew for the morning if access opened. I spent that night in an empty house with my phone, the closing folder, and a folded moving blanket. The refrigerator motor was gone. The walls held pale rectangles where our photographs had hung, and every footstep traveled farther than it used to. I placed Ellen's handwritten measurement beside my wallet so I would not misplace it while half asleep. At 7:12 the next morning, Sarah received the gate access log. Linda's credential had opened the service entrance at 8:55, and the maintenance pickup entered 2 minutes later, well before my movers arrived. Its work order said, "Closing compliance, not repair or emergency maintenance." 5 minutes after Sarah asked the HOA to explain that entry, Linda issued a violation notice accusing me of obstructing community operations and added a $250 administrative charge. Sarah answered with a formal cease and desist demand. She required immediate access, withdrawal of the new charge, and preservation of every version of the ledger. As she sent it, the management company uploaded a revised authorization page bearing a resolution number that had not appeared anywhere the day before. The document had not merely appeared late. Someone was now trying to create the paper trail Sarah had asked the HOA to preserve intact. The revised page carried Resolution 2417 beneath Linda's signature. Sarah compared it with the original file Marcus had downloaded on closing morning. The first page had ended after the $6,800 total. The new page added the resolution number, a paragraph describing moving-related road damage, and a footer dated 3 months earlier. The management portal preserved more than the board seemed to realize. Its activity log showed that Linda's account had uploaded the revision at 8:03 that morning, 16 minutes after Sarah demanded preservation of every version. The file properties showed it had been created the previous night. Sarah sent the comparison to Cedar Ridge's attorney and requested an explanation. Linda answered the neighborhood instead. At 9:30, every owner received an email titled, "Urgent Community Access Disruption." It accused an unnamed departing resident of refusing to pay road obligations and delaying maintenance work at the entrance. My address was omitted, but the description of the moving van made my identity obvious. I removed the brass Mercer nameplate from the mailbox because I did not want Rachel seeing photographs of it in another neighborhood email. I carried it halfway to the porch, then stopped. Ellen had ordered that plate after our first temporary mailbox collapsed in a storm. I screwed it back into place. Leaving Cedar Ridge was already difficult enough, without allowing Linda to make it look like I was slipping away in shame. The second moving crew arrived, but the white pickup still occupied the turning lane. Luis spoke with dispatch while his men waited beside the van. He offered to remove 2 hours of his own overtime from the bill because, as he put it, I had enough trouble already. I thanked him and refused. He had a family and had done nothing wrong. If the charges became part of the case, I wanted the records to show the actual cost rather than conceal it inside the generosity of someone earning an hourly wage. By noon, the delay bill reached $2,160. Marcus documented the new amount and obtained written confirmation that Maya and Evan's lender would hold their rate only through Friday. Maya called to tell me they still wanted the house. She said Noah had already chosen the upstairs bedroom overlooking the maple tree. "We won't cut it down," she said. "I thought you should know." I looked through the kitchen window at branches Ellen and I had once been able to reach from the ground. For the first time since listing the property, I could picture another family beneath that tree without feeling that they were replacing us. Sarah's document review produced a harder contradiction that afternoon. The $38,400 entrance resurfacing invoice was marked paid from reserves, and the contractor's completion report described the pavement as undamaged after its final inspection. When Sarah called the company, its manager confirmed that Cedar Ridge had never asked it to evaluate my moving van or estimate any new repair. Raymond Cole found his old closing records. His unexplained $4,200 charge carried the same account code as mine, but was labeled gate restoration, not road restoration. Another former seller, Janice Bell, sent a statement showing $3,600 for heavy vehicle compliance. The amounts differed, the descriptions changed, and none of the files included an inspection or calculation. Paul forwarded Sarah an email Linda had sent to the board the previous year. Linda argued that owners leaving the community were unlikely to pursue disputed charges because their sales created strict deadlines. She proposed using a flexible administrative code until a formal schedule could be developed. Paul's reply, "We cannot invoice people first and authorize it later," had received no response. That email explained Linda's motive without turning her into a cartoon. Cedar Ridge's operating budget was strained by higher insurance premiums and landscaping contracts the board did not want to reduce. Linda appeared to have convinced herself that sellers created costs, had money available at closing, and would be gone before they organized against her. What she called efficiency depended on people being too exhausted or frightened to resist. Cedar Ridge's attorney finally replied that the truck had remained at the entrance for legitimate maintenance and that any obstruction was incidental. Sarah answered with the gate log, the work order marked closing compliance, and photographs showing no crew or equipment performing repairs. She gave the association 1 hour to clear access before seeking emergency relief, focused on the blockade and the threatened sale. Instead of moving the truck, Linda issued another resident notice stating that legal expenses caused by one owner might require a special assessment. Helen called me in tears. She had supported the security gate years earlier and now felt responsible for what it had become. I told her the gate was not the problem. The problem was treating a shared piece of equipment like a private lever. Then I asked her to save Linda's email rather than delete it in anger. Sarah prepared a verified filing, seeking access, preservation of records, and recovery of documented delay costs. She avoided asking the court to decide every disputed fee on an emergency record. That broader accounting would require evidence and time. Just before her office closed, a plain envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a printed spreadsheet listing 8 home sales, 8 departure charges, and 4 years of payments under the same administrative code. Sarah treated the anonymous spreadsheet as a map, not proof. It listed seller names, closing dates, charge descriptions, amounts, deposit dates, and the same administrative code that appeared on my ledger. But anyone could print a convincing table. Before using it, she needed records from sources Cedar Ridge could not dismiss. Raymond and Janice authorized their title companies to release the relevant pages from their closing files. Marcus obtained written confirmation that my escrow officer had received the $6,800 demand only after issuing the final settlement statement. Sarah compared those documents with the accounting export Cedar Ridge had produced. 6 entries matched the spreadsheet exactly. 2 others matched the dates and amounts but had been renamed special road contributions in the association's books. The bank summaries supplied another piece. Each payment entered Cedar Ridge's operating account, not its road reserve. Within weeks of 3 deposits, the association paid for new clubhouse landscaping, decorative lighting, and an upgraded irrigation controller. Those purchases were not inherently improper, but they contradicted Linda's claim that every departure charge restored damage caused by moving vehicles. Sarah called the number printed on the landscaping invoice. The contractor confirmed that Linda had personally approved the enhancements after the board postponed them during budget discussions. He had no knowledge of seller fees and had been paid through ordinary association checks. The money trail did not prove that Linda had taken funds for herself. It showed something more credible and still damaging. Unsupported charges had been used to relieve an operating budget shortage, while sellers were told they were paying for road damage. Denise Walker, the board secretary, contacted Sarah after receiving the emergency filing. She brought draft minutes from 2 meetings. In one draft, Paul objected to collecting fees before a schedule was approved. In the final version distributed to residents, that paragraph was gone. Denise admitted Linda usually edited the minutes before publication and that she had allowed the changes because challenging the president turned every meeting into an exhausting argument. She kept rubbing the edge of her wedding ring while she spoke. I signed minutes I knew were incomplete. There was no dramatic excuse. Denise had wanted peaceful meetings, fewer hostile emails, and evenings that ended before her children went to bed. Those ordinary wants had made it easier for an inaccurate record to become the official one. Her shame did not erase her choice, but it explained how the system survived without requiring every board member to be cruel. Meanwhile, Marcus documented the risk to Maya and Evan. Their lender's rate lock would expire Friday afternoon. Their title company would not insure over an unresolved HOA demand unless the money remained in escrow and Cedar Ridge agreed not to record a lien during the dispute. Marcus sent those conditions to the association's attorney, making clear that the buyers were not refusing legitimate obligations. They were refusing to finance a charge that appeared after the zero balance certificate. The escrow company confirmed that the $6,800 would stay in its trust account, pending written agreement or further legal direction. Nothing was taken from Cedar Ridge's existing accounts. The HOA simply could not receive the disputed closing funds while withholding the documents needed to justify them. Sarah's emergency request was equally narrow. She asked the court to prohibit Cedar Ridge from blocking ordinary access, preserve electronic files, and prevent a last-minute lien based on the disputed charge. Claims for refunds, broader accounting, and final damages could wait for a fuller record. At the short hearing that afternoon, Cedar Ridge's attorney argued that the maintenance pickup was performing scheduled gate work and that moving it immediately might create a safety problem. Sarah presented the work order labeled Closing Compliance, photographs showing no repair crew, and the entry log tied to Linda's credential. She also presented the moving company invoices and the buyer's extension agreement. The judge did not decide whether every departure fee was invalid. He ordered the association not to obstruct my access, directed both sides to preserve the original and revised ledgers, and scheduled a limited evidentiary hearing on the fee authorization and closing interference. Cedar Ridge was barred from recording a lien based on the $6,800 until that hearing or further agreement. The white pickup moved 43 minutes later. Luis returned with 2 crew members and guided the van through the gate. Once we reached the county road, he pulled into a fuel station so I could inspect the load. I climbed inside and opened the towel-wrapped box. Ellen's yellow clock had survived without a crack. I held it against my chest longer than an object required, feeling its wooden edge press through my shirt. Rachel arrived while I was repacking it. She had learned the full story from Marcus after I authorized him to update her. Her first expression was relief, the second was anger. "You let me think you didn't want to come," she said. I had hidden the blockade to protect her, but the silence had done the opposite. It made her believe the obstacle was me. I apologized without explaining it away, and she helped secure the clock behind the passenger seat. Maya and Evan signed another brief extension, keeping the sale alive until the evidentiary hearing. That evening, Cedar Ridge filed Linda's sworn declaration. She claimed the departure impact policy had received unanimous board approval and that Resolution 24-17 had existed for months. Sarah read the statement twice. Paul and Denise had already agreed to testify, The next question was no longer whether the record was incomplete. It was why Linda had sworn that two people supported a vote they said never happened. That contradiction would now have to survive public testimony. The evidentiary hearing took place 3 days later in a county courtroom where I could see Linda checking the gallery before she sat down. Helen, Raymond, Janice, and several owners had come without being asked. Rachel sat beside me with Ellen's clock wrapped in a sweater at her feet because we had driven directly from her house and she did not want to leave it in the car. Sarah began with the narrow question the judge had set, whether Cedar Ridge had authorized the $6,800 charge and whether the association had intentionally interfered with my closing. She did not lead with the anonymous spreadsheet. She built the record from documents whose sources were known. Marcus authenticated the zero-balance resale certificate, the later demand, and the buyer's extensions. Luis testified about the pickup's position, the two crews, and the waiting invoices. The management portal's administrator confirmed the upload times and explained that Resolution 2417 had been created after Sarah's preservation demand, although its footer displayed an earlier date. Cedar Ridge's attorney argued that the charge was a reasonable allocation of anticipated road wear and that imperfections in board paperwork should not erase the association's duty to protect common property. He pointed out that moving vans were heavier than ordinary vehicles and that prior sellers had paid similar amounts without litigation. It was the strongest version of Linda's position. The problem was that anticipated damage was not what the notices claimed. The notices described repairs already required, while the contractor had found no new damage and the road project had already been paid from reserves. Prior payment also did not establish valid approval. Paul testified next. He identified the blank treasurer line and his email objecting to billing sellers before authorization. When Cedar Ridge's attorney asked whether he had ever moved to rescind the policy, Paul admitted he had not. "I thought not signing would keep it from taking effect," he said. "I was wrong." He did not look toward the owners behind him. I remembered how difficult it had been to tell Rachel that I needed the room she had made for me. Admitting failure in public was not courage without fear. Sometimes it was simply deciding that fear had already cost enough. Denise then authenticated her draft minutes and the edited final versions. She testified that no vote on a departure impact schedule occurred on May 14th because there had been no meeting. She also confirmed that she had never seen Resolution 2417 until after the dispute began. Linda took the stand last. She said the board had reached consensus through emails and informal conversations, and she believed that consensus allowed her to implement a temporary schedule while formal language was prepared. She described the altered document as a clerical correction intended to place an existing decision into proper form. Sarah asked her to identify the email in which Paul or Denise approved $6,800, or any amount. Linda could not. Sarah asked why the first production omitted the resolution number. Linda said management had exported an incomplete version. The portal administrator's testimony had already shown that the numbered version did not exist at the time of that export. Then Sarah displayed Linda's earlier email proposing a flexible administrative code because departing owners faced strict deadlines. Linda acknowledged writing it. She insisted she had been trying to stabilize Cedar Ridge's finances, not target vulnerable people. I believed that part. She had taken a real budget problem and turned it into permission to pressure whoever had the least time to resist. Understanding the explanation did not make the method acceptable. The judge found that Cedar Ridge had not shown a duly adopted fee schedule supporting my charge. He also found a substantial likelihood that the pickup had been positioned to enforce payment rather than perform maintenance. The temporary order remained in effect. Cedar Ridge could not collect or lien the 8 identified departure charges, block normal moving access, or alter relevant electronic records while the case proceeded. The ruling did not award refunds or final damages that afternoon. It directed the association to produce 4 years of bank statements, complete portal history, board communications, and seller account ledgers. It also required Cedar Ridge to issue a corrective notice stating that my access had been restored by court order and that no special assessment had been authorized. Outside the courtroom, Linda approached me without her attorney. For a second, I expected another warning. Instead, she asked whether I understood what would happen if Cedar Ridge had to return every payment while insurance and landscaping costs kept rising. I told her I understood that homeowners would carry the consequences. I also told her Raymond and Janice had already carried consequences that belonged to everyone. She looked exhausted rather than defeated. That did not make us allies, but it kept me from saying the harsher sentence that had formed in my head. The ordered accounting made settlement unavoidable. Bank records confirmed $31,400 in departure charges from 8 sellers. None had been transferred into a road reserve or tied to an inspection. Cedar Ridge agreed in principle to refund those payments with interest, reimburse my documented moving and extension costs, withdraw every related ledger entry, and adopt a written rule prohibiting access restrictions as a collection method. Paul and Denise agreed the settlement would be presented at a meeting, with the accounting report available to owners. Sarah insisted on that provision because repayment alone would leave habits intact. The board could repair its budget only after residents saw which decisions had created the shortage and who had been made to cover it. My own agreement allocated $2,160 for mover delay, $1,475 for legal and closing-related expenses not otherwise recovered, and $900 for the additional financing and document costs incurred by Maya and Evan. The disputed $6,800 remained untouched in escrow and would be released back into the closing funds, not paid to me as a windfall. When Marcus called with the final clearance, I was sitting at Rachel's kitchen table while Noah's welcome home drawing waited in a photograph on my phone. Rachel set a mug beside me and did not ask whether I could manage the paperwork alone. She simply turned the pages as I read, staying close without taking them from my hands. The sale was cleared to close the following morning. For the first time since the white pickup appeared, the question was not whether I could leave Cedar Ridge. It was what the neighborhood would do after the gate could no longer be used against the next person. Maya and Evan signed the final papers at 10:20 the next morning. When Marcus confirmed that the deed had recorded and the disputed escrow funds had returned to the transaction, I handed Maya the house keys beside the maple tree. Noah carried his welcome home sign under one arm and asked whether the yellow kitchen clock came with the house. I told him it belonged with me, but I showed him the small notch Ellen had marked on the kitchen doorway when Rachel turned 10. Maya promised not to paint over it without asking Rachel first. That promise mattered more than anything written in the closing packet. The Cedar Ridge settlement was approved 2 weeks later at an open meeting. All 8 sellers received refunds totaling $31,400 plus interest. The association reimbursed the documented costs listed in my agreement and paid Maya and Evans $900 directly. No one received punitive damages, and the settlement did not pretend the neighborhood's budget problem had disappeared. Owners approved a revised budget after reviewing the accounting report. Decorative lighting was postponed, landscaping service was reduced, and a modest assessment was adopted through the required process. It was unpleasant, but everyone saw the same numbers before voting. Raymond called afterward. He said the money mattered, but the corrected ledger mattered more, because he had spent a year wondering whether paying quickly meant he had failed to protect his buyer. I told him exhaustion was what Linda's system had counted on. Agreeing to help expose it was how he had protected the people who came afterward. Linda resigned as president before the vote. She remained responsible for her regular assessments but admitted no personal theft because the accounting had found none. Denise stepped down as secretary. Paul stayed long enough to help install a document retention policy, then declined another term. Helen volunteered for the records committee, saying she was finished watching important things through closed blinds. The white maintenance pickup returned to ordinary work. Cedar Ridge posted a written access rule stating that gates and service lanes could never be used to collect disputed money. The red notice disappeared from the gatehouse window. At Rachel's home, the downstairs room no longer looked temporary. She cleared one shelf for Ellen's clock, but I placed it there myself. On the first Sunday morning, I wound it while coffee brewed in a brand I had chosen without trying to remember Ellen's old preference. Rachel stood in the doorway pretending to inspect the curtains. I thanked her for preparing the room, and more importantly, for leaving space for me to decide how to live in it. She smiled and said Noah had already scheduled my first visit to the maple tree. When I returned a month later, Maya and Evan had hung Noah's sign in the garage. Children rode bicycles through the open gate, and the maple leaves cast the same moving shadows across the kitchen floor that Ellen once loved. The house had not forgotten us. It had simply made room for more people. I kept the handwritten refrigerator measurement in my wallet, although it was useful nowhere. Some records prove ownership, some expose a false charge, and some preserve a life that cannot be entered on any ledger. Leaving Cedar Ridge did not mean surrendering my home. It meant refusing to let someone else's pressure decide how I said goodbye, and carrying the part that mattered through the gate with me.